This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hi everyone, I'm Nita Hone, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. At least, that's normally what I do in this series. From time to time, I like to take a break from the typical format and instead do something that is subjective or biographical, and that's what we're doing today. I'm going to give you 10 cards that I thought were super good when I first started playing Magic when I was 10 years old. Evaluating cards perfectly is impossible, even for the most seasoned players, but 10 and 11-year-old me was particularly bad at it. If you started playing Magic when you were quite young, you probably have a list of your own that would contain a lot of cards from the sets that were new when you started playing. For me, that primarily means Urzas, Masks, and Invasion blocks. So in this video, I'm going to talk about 10 especially bad cards that I thought were good, explain what I thought was so awesome about them at the time, and then discuss what makes them bad cards. As is usually the case with my bad card top 10s, to be eligible for inclusion on this list, a card has to not have had any Premier Event top 8s and also not be widely played in EDH. If a card is widely played in EDH or has a Premier Event top 8, it's pretty hard to argue that the card is bad. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, I have Lotus Guardian. There are a number of cards on this list that sort of swayed me in the direction of playing them as a result of having really cool art, and that's part of what really drew me to this 7-mana 4/4 flyer. Dana Knutson's art here is incredible. She really created a unique, awesome-looking creature for this card, and while it doesn't say it on the card itself, Lotus Guardian was given the dragon creature type later on, and I think I'll probably get a lot of pushback on this, but I think it's the best dragon art in the whole game, though some of that is probably nostalgia. Anyway, in addition to the art really drawing me in, I was also well aware, as pretty much all Magic players are, that Black Lotus was insanely good, and this card was clearly referring back to Black Lotus. It had Lotus in its name, and apparently it guards the fields where those lotuses grow. How can that card not be good, right? In addition to that, it was also colorless, so I could just put it in any deck I wanted. When 11-year-old me opened this in an invasion booster, I thought I had really done it and opened the best rare in the set. Unfortunately, while Lotus Guardian is really cool, it isn't actually good. A 7-mana 4/4 flyer wasn't even good back then, and by the time you play this 7-mana creature, you aren't really going to be in desperate need of the mana it can produce either. At number 9, I have Beast of Burden. So the flavor of this card is what drew me into it at first. As you may have heard me say in other videos, Karn's Silver Golem is my favorite Magic card ever, as it was one of the first rare cards I ever opened, and I also thought it was cool he was a golem, as I was familiar with them from Jewish folklore. Karn is actually a good card, so obviously he didn't make the list, but Beast of Burden did. When I opened Beast of Burden, I actually thought it was Karn. This is explained in the flavor text, which notes that Urza built another golem that looks a lot like Karn, but it seems to be more of a mindless automaton who does the heavy lifting on the Weatherlight. So the Karn connection already had me interested in Beast of Burden, but then I actually thought the card itself was great too. I mean, it has power and toughness equal to the number of creatures in play, so it's always going to be massive, right? Wrong. As one does when they're quite young, I only thought of ideal situations where Beast of Burden would be huge, and not the ones where you pay 6 mana for a 2/2. What's more is, all that size doesn't mean much when the creature doesn't have any other abilities to speak of. Still, I put this in my Karn Silver Golem deck, because flavor, and I also thought it would pair really well with Karn's ability to animate artifacts, cause, that gives you more creatures. In the end though, Beast of Burden ended up being pretty disappointing. Even 10-year-old me figured that out after a few games. The Beast is better in EDH, where there will be more creatures around in multiplayer games, but there are lots of better cards out there that pay you off for going wide. At number 8, I have Lava Axe. I feel like this card is one that would appear on a lot of people's lists. This is because it's been reprinted like 100 times, so many new players come into contact with this card, and if you're starting out, it seems pretty awesome. I mean, just do the math. It does 5 damage all on its own, and if you have 4 in your deck, that's 20 damage, so you basically win the game if you have 4 Lava Axes. At least, that's how I thought about it when I was a kid. As I matured as a Magic player, it quickly became clear that not only was Lava Axe not good, it was terrible. With a card like this, it basically doesn't do anything until it lowers the opponent's life to 0. Before that, you're giving up a whole card and paying a massive 5 mana to do 5 damage, and that is really all Lava Axe does. Even in burn decks, there are dozens, if not hundreds of better options than Lava Axe. At number 7, I have Avatar of Might, Avatar of Hope, and Avatar of Will. I included them all together here because they are all part of the same cycle of avatars in Prophecy. All of them have a mana value of 8 and are fairly imposing if you play them. They all come with a specific condition that lowers the cost of casting it to just 2 colored mana. The 2 other cards from this cycle, Avatar of Woe and Avatar of Fury, managed to not make this list because they're not terrible. In fact, both are pretty good. Avatar of Woe was played on the Grand Prix and Pro Tour circuit, and Avatar of Fury is fairly widely played in EDH. I thought this whole cycle was good and amazing, and I guess I was right about 2/5 of it at least. These 3 though are pretty terrible. As I did with other cards, I always imagined casting them for only 2 mana, as if it was a foregone conclusion, but the conditions on all 3 of these are too hard to meet, and the creature you get out of all 3 of them, while certainly pretty good in a vacuum, isn't so great that you can afford to stick them in your deck if they don't usually cost 2 mana. Avatar of Might needs someone to have 4 or more creatures than you, and that's a ton. It just doesn't happen that often. And even in EDH, where it is likely to happen more often, it isn't like people are jamming this into very many decks. An 8/8 Trampler just isn't that great when it costs 8, and that's normally how it's going to go. Avatar of Hope is even worse though. It will only cost 6 when you are near death. 3 life is not very much at all. This was the first card where I saw the line, may block any number of creatures, and that seemed really cool to me. And when I first saw this, I thought about how sweet it would be to have it come down with its 4/9 flying body and just block everything your opponent attacked with. The problem is, while 9 toughness is a lot, it isn't so much that it will last very long, and since you're down at 3 life, you're dead to pretty much everything. Lastly, there's Avatar of Will, which is certainly the worst of the cycle. Unless your opponent has 0 cards in their hand, you're going to be playing this as an 8 mana 5/6 with flying, and that's a disaster. Your opponent getting to 0 cards is far from a foregone conclusion too, so this is certainly the one that you will have the hardest time making use of. At number 6, I have Urzas Armor. This is another card where the cool art and flavor really swayed me. It's funny because I didn't really pay that much attention to the lore even back then, but I thought the flavor text here made Urza sound like the coolest guy ever, and his armor is pretty awesome in the art, but yeah, the card is really bad. 6 mana for an artifact that prevents a single damage every time something damages you just isn't worth it at all. I thought it was, of course, and jammed it into my Karn Silver Golem deck, imagining turning it into a 6/6. And to be fair, if this was a 6 mana 6/6 with that ability, it would be nowhere near this list, and that is what it was sometimes in that deck, but it still wasn't very good. At number 5, I have Skye Shroud Behemoth. This creature is huge. A 7 mana 10/10 was unthinkable to me when I opened this in a booster pack. And sure, it comes with the double downside of entering tapped and having fading, but I thought it had to be worth it. I applied some similar math here to how I did with Lava Axe, thinking it would be able to attack twice and it's a 10/10, so that's 20 damage. Unfortunately, with no evasion or other abilities to speak of, the behemoth only had to be interacted with a couple of times by a block or other means, at which point it would just go away. Basically, it isn't much of a threat and comes with way too much downside for the mana cost. At number 4, I have Leviathan, one of only 2 cards on this list that aren't from Urzas, Masks, or Invasion block. It was originally printed in the dark, but I first encountered it in 2000's Beatdown box set, which was a supplemental set that was all reprints. This is another case where the art played a large role in making me like the card, as I had just never seen art like Leviathan's. Mark Teaton did a great job of conveying the massive size and otherworldliness of this deep-sea creature. Like with Skye Shroud Behemoth, the idea that I could attack with this twice to kill someone seemed awesome and very doable. Unfortunately, the card is downright awful. A 10 mana 10/10 with trample already isn't great, but this comes with a massive amount of downside. It gobbles up all of your islands in a hurry, needing to sacrifice 2 every time you attack and untap it. You'll run out of resources in a hurry if you're trying to win the game with Leviathan. At number 3, I have Psychic Venom, which, like Leviathan, is a card that isn't from Urza's, Masks, or Invasion block. This one goes all the way back to Alpha. At some point in my early days, one of my friends got a bunch of cards from his older brother, and I saw this, and I traded for it. I don't remember what other cards this friend had, and I'm kind of glad I don't, because who knows what I passed up to get my hands on Psychic Venom. This is another card where the art swayed me for sure, as I thought the snake in the foreground and the eyes in the background did a really good job of showing that this guy was controlling this venomous snake. What the card actually does, though, isn't good. You stick this on a land, and then anytime your opponent taps it, they take 2 damage. My train of thought was essentially this. Well, my opponent has to tap their land, so this will do a ton of damage to them. Problem is, when you play it, you're going down a card for an effect that won't matter for several turns in most cases, and that card disadvantage is often enough to make you lose before the damage this does really matters. At number 2, I have the whole Planewalker enchantment cycle from Planeshift. These cards actually occupy a pretty interesting place in the history of Magic. Planeshift came out years before the first card with the Planeswalker type would be printed, and this was one attempt by the designers to create a card that represented Planeswalkers. In the story, Urza had assembled a Gatewatch of sorts, and each of these represents one of the Planeswalkers who was part of his team. So when these came out, I thought they were really cool for that reason in particular. All of them are 3-mana enchantments that let you pay 4 mana to have your opponent reveal a random card in their hand, and for all but the blue one, you get some type of effect related to the converted mana cost of that card. The blue one lets you cast the revealed card for free if it's an instant or sorcery. Once again, I imagined ideal situations with all of them, like making my opponent reveal some high mana value cards so I got a huge effect. Unfortunately, it rarely worked out that way. This type of effect is far too random. If your opponent has no cards in hand, this does very little, especially for the red, blue, and black cards in the cycle because they can only be used at sorcery speed. Even if your opponent does have a card, if they reveal a land, you get nothing, and if they reveal a cheap card, you get very little. At least, unlike most of the other cards on this list, the design here is pretty innovative and interesting, even if the end result was one of the worst cycles in the entire history of Magic. And at number 1, I have Shrouded Serpent. Like Lotus Guardian, Dana Knutson was the artist for this card, and apparently, I'm easily swayed by his art, because this is another horrible 7-mana creature that I thought was amazing. Sure, Shrouded Serpent is unblockable, but let's be real, even a 7-mana 4/4 that's unblockable all the time wouldn't be good, though it certainly would be better and not get a spot on this list. But yeah, even imagining the ideal scenario here looks pretty bad, and that ideal scenario won't come up a ton. Shrouded Serpent dies to a whole lot for such an expensive card, and the opponent will often just have the mana to make it so they can block it anyway. One particularly nasty event for me was when my opponent used Dark Ritual to make the mana at instant speed, and then blocked the Serpent with a 5/5. That was enough to make me realize that maybe playing Shrouded Serpent wasn't such a good idea. Well, those are 10 terrible cards that I thought were good at some point between age 10 and 12. If you want to own any of these cards for some reason, you can buy them at Card Kingdom. You can find a direct link to the Card Kingdom store for each of them in the description. In the comments, let me know a few cards you thought were great when you first started playing and then realized weren't very good. I think this is a pretty fun topic to talk about. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and turn on notifications to stay aware of future uploads. And if you want to catch up on other MTG Top 10s, you should see the playlists on your screen shortly. Finally, if you enjoy listening to me talk about Magic, consider subscribing to my other YouTube channel where I talk about medieval and religious history. Thanks for watching.